From alien abductions to secret AIDS drama, from a $35 weekly costume budget to primetime television's first use of the word bitch, the glamorous world of Dynasty was far stranger behind the scenes than viewers could imagine. The show that defined 1980s excess harbored bizarre casting disasters, health scares covered up from co-stars, and production costs so outrageous they had to stop filming catfights because the mud was too expensive. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Dynasty 1981. Fact 1. George Peppard was fired from Blake. Before John Forsythe became the suave and commanding Blake Carrington that fans remember, another major Hollywood star was supposed to fill those expensive suits. George Peppard, who later became famous as the leader of the A-Team, was originally cast to play the oil tycoon patriarch of the Carrington family when Dynasty began production in 1980. However, Peppard's time as Blake lasted only through the filming of the pilot episode before everything fell apart spectacularly. According to director Ralph Sinensky and various production accounts, Peppard had signed on knowing that Blake was written as a villain with significant moral complexity. But once cameras started rolling, he completely changed his approach to the character. Rather than embracing Blake's darker qualities and ruthless business tactics, Peppard began demanding that the writers soften the character and turn him into more of a traditional hero. The situation became even worse when Peppard started displaying problematic behavior on set. He attempted to take control away from the director, was reportedly rude to other cast and crew members, and most shocking of all, actively tried to sabotage his fellow actors' performances during scenes. Production sources described him as trying to establish dominance by acting as badly as possible off-camera to show that he considered it his set. The final straw came when Peppard's behavior became so disruptive that the show's producers threatened to quit the project entirely unless ABC replaced him. The network had no choice but to fire Peppard and bring in John Forsythe as his replacement. This meant the production team had to return to the Filoli estate in California that fall to reshoot all of Peppard's scenes, with Forsythe now playing Blake. Interestingly, Joan Collins, who would later join the show as Alexis, had worked with Peppard on a film about 10 years earlier, and they reportedly couldn't stand each other. Had Peppard remained in the role, Collins might never have agreed to take the part of Alexis, which would have completely changed Dynasty's trajectory toward becoming a television phenomenon. Fact 2. First, bitch in primetime history. Dynasty broke a major television taboo on April 13, 1983, when Linda Evans's character Crystal finally reached her breaking point with Joan Collins's scheming Alexis and delivered what would become a historic line in American television. During the episode titled The Threat, Crystal looked directly at her nemesis and declared, "You miserable bitch," before pushing Alexis into the famous lily pond, marking the very first time the word bitch had ever been spoken on American primetime network television. This moment didn't happen by accident, but was the result of carefully building tension between the two characters throughout the show's second and third seasons. The specific scene occurred after Alexis had caused Crystal to suffer a miscarriage by intentionally startling her horse with a gunshot, and later manipulated events so that Crystal lost custody of her great-nephew Danny. The writers had been escalating the rivalry between Blake Carrington's current wife and his vindictive ex-wife, leading to this explosive confrontation that would define both characters and the entire series. What made this television milestone even more significant was the context in which it aired. In the early 1980s, network television operated under much stricter content standards than today, and certain words were simply forbidden from primetime broadcasts. The fact that ABC allowed this particular word to be spoken during one of television's most popular shows represented a major shift in what was considered acceptable for family viewing hours. The episode itself became legendary among Dynasty fans and television historians alike. TV Guide later ranked The Threat as number 67 on their list of the top 100 episodes in television history, specifically citing both the historic use of profanity and the spectacular catfight that followed immediately after Chrysler's declaration. The combination of the forbidden word and the physical confrontation that ensued created one of the most memorable moments in soap opera history, helping to cement Dynasty's reputation as a show that pushed boundaries and wasn't afraid to shock its audience. Fact 3. Rock Hudson's secret AIDS terror. One of Hollywood's most beloved leading men carried a devastating secret during his final television role that created an agonizing moral dilemma behind the scenes of Dynasty. Rock Hudson was secretly diagnosed with AIDS on June 5, 1984. Just as he began his recurring role as Daniel Reese, a love interest for Linda Evans' character Crystal Carrington, but he kept this diagnosis completely hidden from his co-stars, the production crew, and the public for over a year. The situation became particularly torturous for Hudson when he received a script calling for a romantic kissing scene with Evans. According to his secretary, Mark Miller, Hudson panicked when he saw what was required, asking desperately, "I've got to kiss Linda. What the hell am I going to do?" This was during the early days of the AIDS crisis, when medical knowledge about transmission was still limited, and many people incorrectly believed the virus could be spread through casual contact, like kissing or even handshakes. Hudson's terror about potentially infecting Evans led him to take extreme precautions on the day they filmed their romantic scene. He used every available gargle, mouthwash, and throat spray he could find, desperately trying to disinfect his mouth before the cameras rolled. When the scene was finally completed, Hudson told Miller, "The kiss is over with, thank God," describing it as one of the worst days of his entire life because of the emotional torment he experienced. The resulting scene showed Hudson's internal struggle as he delivered what Evans later described as a very timid and unromantic kiss. Looking back at the footage, Hudson's friend George Nader observed that Rock kept his lips closed and hit Linda on the side of the cheek for a brief, chaste kiss. He did not open his mouth. No saliva was exchanged. Evans herself didn't learn about Hudson's diagnosis until years later, when she realized he had been trying to protect her during their scenes together. The controversy that erupted after Hudson's diagnosis became public led to new Screen Actors Guild rules requiring advance notification of performers before any scenes involving open-mouth kissing. Fact 4. 35. Zero weekly costume budget. Insanity. Dynasty's costume department operated with a weekly wardrobe budget that was absolutely staggering for 1980s television, as costume designer Nolan Miller commanded $35,000 every single week to dress the cast in the most extravagant fashions ever seen on primetime television. To put this enormous sum in perspective, this weekly clothing allowance was more than many people's entire annual salaries during that era, and it represented an almost unheard-of investment in television costuming that most networks would have considered financially reckless. Miller used this massive budget to create what he described as a fantasy lifestyle for people who were rich, designing approximately 3,000 individual costumes throughout Dynasty's 9-season run. His philosophy was simple but expensive. He famously declared, "I never want to see them wearing the same outfit twice," which meant that every single dress, suit, gown, and accessory had to be either custom-made or extensively altered to ensure no character ever repeated a look throughout the entire series. The designer's approach to Dynasty fashion was inspired by old Hollywood glamour, particularly the style of legendary actress Joan Crawford, whom Miller had personally dressed for 20 years before working on the show. Producer Aaron Spelling gave Miller complete creative freedom with this unprecedented budget, telling him that Dynasty was meant to be a fantasy for a lifestyle if you were rich, and Miller took that directive seriously by creating costumes that featured intricate beadwork, luxurious fabrics, and the iconic shoulder pads that would define 1980s fashion. Miller's extravagant creations became so popular with audiences that Dynasty eventually spawned its own successful line of women's fashion called the Dynasty Collection, featuring designs based on the costumes worn by Joan Collins, Linda Evans, Stephanie Beacham, and Diane Carroll. The costume department's work was so impressive that Miller won an Emmy Award in 1984 for Outstanding Costumes for a Series, specifically for his work on the episode titled The Wedding, making all that weekly spending worthwhile from both an artistic and commercial standpoint. Fact 5. The Colbys ended with UFO abduction. Television history was made on March 26, 1987, when Dynasty's spin-off series The Colbys concluded its two-season run with what many consider the most outrageous and bizarre cliffhanger ever filmed for a primetime soap opera. In the final scene of the series, Fallon Carrington Colby, played by Emma Sams, was driving alone through a desert road when her car suddenly broke down, leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere with only her car phone to call for help. As Fallon stood beside her disabled vehicle, a mysterious bright light appeared in the sky above her, growing larger and more intense as it descended toward the ground. What landed in front of the startled character was an actual flying saucer, complete with flashing lights and special effects that were quite impressive for 1980s television production values. The spacecraft opened to reveal a welcoming figure inside, and without any hesitation or apparent fear, Fallon simply walked up the ramp and disappeared into the UFO, which then closed its doors and zoomed away into the night sky, taking one of Dynasty's main characters with it. This incredible ending was clearly a desperate attempt by the show's creators to generate enough buzz and curiosity to save the Colbys from cancellation, but the stunt backfired spectacularly when ABC decided not to renew the series anyway. The alien abduction cliffhanger left writers with an enormous problem when Fallon needed to return to the original Dynasty series for its 8th season just a few months later. Rather than pretending the UFO incident never happened, Dynasty's writers chose to incorporate Fallon's extraterrestrial experience into the show's ongoing storylines. When she reappeared on Dynasty, Jeff Colby found her wandering along a roadside miles from where her car had been discovered, and Fallon insisted to her skeptical husband that she had indeed been abducted by aliens, though she had very few detailed memories of her time away. The storyline continued with Fallon attending support group meetings for people who claimed to have been abducted by aliens, which became one of several factors that eventually destroyed her second marriage to Jeff. Fact 6. Catfights became too expensive to film. The elaborate physical confrontations between Crystal and Alexis that made Dynasty famous eventually became so costly to produce that Aaron Spelling and his production team had to drastically reduce their frequency. Despite these dramatic scenes being the show's most popular and talked about moments among viewers, the catfights had evolved from simple arguments into elaborate set pieces that required extensive preparation, special locations, and costly materials that were driving the show's budget to unsustainable levels. Producer Aaron Spelling later explained the financial reality behind this decision, revealing that we had to stop doing the catfights because the mud cost too much and was ruining their wardrobe. What had started as relatively simple confrontations had grown into increasingly complex productions that involved the actresses fighting in swimming pools, specially prepared mud baths, and other messy environments that required extensive cleanup and costume replacement afterward. The problem wasn't just the cost of the mud itself, but the expensive designer gowns and elaborate costumes that Joan Collins and Linda Evans wore during these scenes. Since costume designer Nolan Miller was creating custom outfits that cost thousands of dollars each, having them destroyed during a single catfight scene represented a significant financial loss that the production could no longer justify, especially when the actresses were often wearing multiple layers of expensive clothing and jewelry. Spelling emphasized that the humor and unexpected nature of these fights had been a key part of Dynasty's appeal, explaining that It was done in such a humorous way that you didn't expect they would be wearing those gorgeous gowns and then push each other into a swimming pool. That was the fun of Dynasty. The contrast between the characters' elegant appearance and their willingness to engage in physical combat while dressed in formal wear had become one of the show's defining characteristics. Entertainment columnist Sue Cameron noted that these catfights had become so culturally significant that members of the press were regularly invited to watch the filming of these scenes, turning them into major media events that generated publicity for the show. However, the increasing production costs eventually forced the writers to find other ways to create drama between the characters without destroying expensive costumes and sets. Fact 7. Lily Pond fight was only knee-deep. The most famous catfight in Dynasty history, which took place in a lily pond during the episode The Threat, created a stunning visual illusion that made viewers believe Crystal and Alexis were wrestling in dangerously deep water. But the reality behind the cameras was far less dramatic than it appeared on screen. Linda Evans later revealed in her 2011 memoir that the entire fight sequence was carefully choreographed in water that was only 2.5 feet deep, meaning both actresses were actually fighting while kneeling on the bottom of the pond throughout the entire scene. The production team used clever camera angles and strategic positioning to make the water appear much deeper than it actually was, creating the impression that both women were struggling to stay afloat while they grabbed each other's hair and fought for dominance. Evans explained that it looked like we were in 6 feet of water, but in reality, we were in only 2.5 feet, and fighting on our knees, which required both actresses to maintain the illusion of being in deep water, while actually being quite stable and safe on the pond floor. The filming of this iconic scene required extensive preparation and safety measures that viewers never saw. Both Linda Evans and Joan Collins wore protective knee pads underneath their expensive designer gowns to prevent injury while kneeling on the hard bottom of the pond during the extended fight sequence. The actresses had to coordinate their movements carefully to maintain the visual effect, while ensuring they didn't accidentally reveal that they were actually kneeling rather than treading water. This famous scene was filmed at the Arden Villa Estate in Pasadena, California, which served as one of the exterior locations for the Carrington Mansion throughout the series. The Lily Pond fight became so culturally significant that it was later ranked among the greatest television moments of the 1980s. And the location itself became a point of interest for Dynasty fans. The careful staging and technical execution of this deceptively simple scene demonstrated how television magic could transform a shallow ornamental pond into what appeared to be a life-threatening aquatic battle between two glamorous rivals. Fact 8. Original family names were completely different. Before Dynasty became the household name that defined 1980s television drama, the show went through a complete identity transformation during its early development stages, starting with a working title that bore no resemblance to the final product. The series was originally called Oil, which directly reflected its focus on wealthy petroleum industry families and their business rivalries, making it clear that ABC intended to create a direct competitor to the hugely successful CBS series Dallas. Even more dramatically different were the names of the two main families that would drive the show's central conflicts and romantic entanglements. In the earliest drafts of the pilot script, the primary family was known as the Parkhursts rather than the Carringtons, while their business rivals and occasional romantic partners were called the Corbys instead of the Colbys that viewers eventually came to know. The decision to change these fundamental elements of the show happened during the production process, as creators Richard and Esther Shapiro worked with ABC executives and producer Aaron Spelling to refine their vision for the series. By the time actual filming began, the show had been renamed Dynasty, and the feuding families had been rechristened as the Carringtons and Colbys, names that would become synonymous with primetime soap opera, excess, and glamour. The writers deliberately crafted the rivalry between these newly named families to echo one of literature's most famous feuds, modeling the Carrington and Colby conflict after the Montagues and Capulets from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. This meant the families were designed to be crossed in love and war, with romantic relationships constantly complicated by business disputes and family loyalty conflicts. These early changes proved to be crucial to the show's eventual success, as the name Dynasty suggested the kind of multi-generational family saga and power struggles that would become the series' trademark elements. The more elegant and aristocratic-sounding family names also better reflected the level of wealth and sophistication that the show wanted to portray, moving away from the more straightforward oil industry focus suggested by the original title and character names. Fact 9. Fake jewelry rivaled real Tiffany. The dazzling jewelry that adorned Joan Collins, Linda Evans, and the rest of Dynasty's wealthy characters looked like it came straight from the world's most prestigious jewelry houses, but viewers would have been shocked to learn that none of the sparkling diamonds, emeralds, and pearls were actually real gems from famous retailers like Tiffany & Company or Harry Winston. Instead, every single piece of jewelry worn on the show was created by Norman Miller, a talented costume jewelry designer whose ingenious craftsmanship was so convincing that even close-up camera work couldn't reveal the truth about these elaborate fake creations. Norman Miller's skill at creating believable luxury jewelry was so exceptional that his pieces rivaled the appearance of genuine precious stones and metals, fooling not only television audiences, but also industry professionals who worked closely with the show. The designer understood that Dynasty's characters needed to appear fabulously wealthy at all times, so he crafted elaborate necklaces, earrings, bracelets, and rings that would sparkle and shine under the television studio lights, just like real gemstones would. This decision to use custom-made costume jewelry, rather than borrowing or renting authentic pieces from established jewelry houses, made perfect sense from both a practical and financial standpoint. Real jewelry from prestigious companies would have required expensive insurance policies, extensive security measures, and careful handling that could have slowed down production and added significant costs to an already expensive show. Miller's fake jewelry also gave the costume department much more creative freedom than they would have had with authentic pieces, allowing them to design jewelry that perfectly matched specific outfits and storyline requirements. The costume jewelry could be made in any size, style, or color combination that the scripts demanded, and there was no concern about damaging priceless heirlooms during the physical catfight scenes that Dynasty became famous for. The success of Miller's jewelry designs became so notable that his work helped establish costume jewelry as a legitimate and sophisticated alternative to real gems, proving that skilled craftsmanship could create pieces that were virtually indistinguishable from authentic luxury jewelry when viewed on television screens. Fact 10. Joan Collins was third choice for Alexis. The role of Alexis Carrington that would define Joan Collins's career and transform Dynasty from a struggling soap opera into a television phenomenon was never intended for her in the first place, as the show's producers had their sights set on much bigger Hollywood stars when they began casting for this pivotal character. The producers initially approached Sophia Loren, the legendary Italian actress known for her dramatic roles in films like Two Women and Marriage Italian Style, offering her the chance to play Blake Carrington's scheming ex-wife, who would arrive in Denver to wreak havoc on his new marriage. When Sophia Loren declined the opportunity to enter the world of American television soap operas, the producers turned to their second choice. Elizabeth Taylor, one of Hollywood's most famous and glamorous stars, who had already proven her ability to play complex and manipulative characters in films throughout her career. Taylor's involvement in Dynasty would have brought enormous star power and media attention to the show, given her legendary status and tumultuous personal life that constantly made headlines around the world. However, Elizabeth Taylor also passed on the role of Alexis, leaving the producers to consider other options for this crucial character who was designed to be Chrysler's primary antagonist and the source of much of the show's dramatic conflict. This is when Joan Collins entered the picture as the third choice, bringing her own considerable experience in playing sophisticated and often villainous characters from her extensive film career in both British and American productions. Collins's casting proved to be absolutely perfect for Dynasty's needs, as she brought a unique combination of elegance, wit, and theatrical flair that made Alexis Carrington one of television's most memorable characters. Her arrival in the show's second season immediately transformed Dynasty's ratings and cultural impact, turning what had been a modestly successful series into a cultural phenomenon that would eventually reach #1 in the television ratings and spawn fashion trends, merchandise lines, and countless imitations throughout the 1980s. Fact 11. Pamela Sue Martin wore secret wigs. Pamela Sue Martin, who played the glamorous and headstrong Fallon Carrington during Dynasty's first 4 seasons, was hiding a deeply personal and embarrassing secret that forced her to wear wigs throughout her entire time on the show, despite the fact that most viewers had no idea her luxurious hairstyles weren't actually her own hair. Martin was suffering from significant hair loss that had begun gradually but became increasingly noticeable during her time filming the series, creating a serious problem for an actress who was supposed to embody the epitome of 1980s glamour and sophistication. In a 2007 interview with the Daily Mail, Martin revealed the extent of her hair loss problem, explaining that, "It started gradually. My hairline started receding. Then I got thin patches across my scalp. This condition was particularly devastating for an actress working during what she described as the era of big hair, when voluminous, elaborate hairstyles were not just fashionable, but absolutely essential for any character meant to represent wealth and status on television." The Dynasty producers were well aware of Martin's hair loss situation and made the decision to require her to wear wigs for all of her scenes as Fallon, ensuring that the character would always have the full, glamorous hair that was expected of a wealthy oil heiress during the height of the 1980s fashion era. Martin later revealed that the Dynasty producers insisted I wear a wig when I started the show in 1981, making it clear that this was not her personal choice, but a requirement from the production team. The irony of this situation was that Martin's character Fallon was supposed to represent the ultimate in feminine beauty and sophistication, yet the actress playing her was dealing with a condition that made her feel insecure about her appearance. The wigs were so expertly crafted and styled that they became an integral part of Fallon's iconic look, contributing to the character's reputation as one of television's most fashionable and glamorous figures, even though viewers never suspected they weren't seeing Martin's natural hair. Fact 12. Communist governments feared the show. Dynasty's portrayal of extreme wealth and capitalist excess caused genuine political concern in Yugoslavia when the show was announced for broadcast in 1984, as the country's communist government worried that this glamorous American soap opera could actually threaten the stability of their socialist system by exposing their citizens to ideas about luxury and private wealth that contradicted everything their political ideology represented. The Yugoslav communist authorities were particularly troubled by Dynasty's unapologetic celebration of material success and individual wealth accumulation, which stood in direct opposition to the collective ownership principles and economic equality that formed the foundation of their political system. Government officials feared that showing citizens the lavish lifestyle of the Carrington family, with their massive mansion, expensive cars, designer clothing, and seemingly unlimited financial resources, could inspire dangerous thoughts about capitalist alternatives to their current way of life. This concern wasn't entirely unreasonable from the government's perspective, considering that Dynasty deliberately showcased the most extravagant aspects of American capitalism through its characters' daily lives. Every episode featured scenes of conspicuous consumption, from elaborate dinner parties and expensive jewelry to luxury travel and designer fashion, all of which represented exactly the kind of individual prosperity that communist ideology argued was both impossible and morally wrong under their system. Despite these official concerns about Dynasty's potential to spread capitalistic ideas and destabilize the communist regime, the government's worries only served to increase public interest in the show among Yugoslav citizens. The controversy and commotion surrounding the announcement of Dynasty's broadcast created even more curiosity about this American program that their own government considered dangerous enough to worry about publicly. When Dynasty finally did begin airing in Yugoslavia, it became incredibly popular with viewers who were fascinated by this glimpse into a completely different economic and social system. The show's success in communist countries demonstrated the universal appeal of dramatic family conflicts and romantic storylines, even when those stories were set against a backdrop of wealth and luxury that most viewers could never hope to experience in their own lives under their current political system. Fact 13. Multiple strike delays plagued production. Dynasty faced an unusually challenging production schedule throughout its 9-season run, as the show was repeatedly delayed by major Hollywood labor strikes that brought television and film production to a complete standstill at crucial moments in the series' development and broadcast timeline. These work stoppages affected Dynasty more than many other shows because they occurred at particularly critical points in the series' production cycle, causing significant scheduling disruptions that forced ABC and the production team to constantly adjust their plans and broadcast dates. The first major disruption occurred before Dynasty even premiered, when the 1980 Screen Actors Guild strike delayed the show's pilot episode, along with many other new television programs that had been scheduled to debut that fall. This strike was caused by serious disagreements between television networks and the partnership of the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists over contract terms and working conditions, and it lasted long enough to push Dynasty's premiere from its originally planned air date all the way to January 12, 1981. Just as Dynasty was finding its footing and preparing for its crucial second season, production was hit again by the 1981 Writers Guild of America strike, which once again forced delays in script development and filming schedules. This second strike was particularly problematic because the show's creators were in the process of introducing Joan Collins as Alexis Carrington, a character addition that would prove essential to Dynasty's eventual success, making any delays in the second season potentially devastating to the show's future prospects. The final labor dispute to affect Dynasty came near the end of the series' run, when the 1988 Writers Guild of America strike delayed production of the show's 9th and final season. By this point, Dynasty's ratings had already begun to decline from their peak years in the mid-1980s, so any additional production delays only added to the challenges facing a show that was already struggling to maintain its audience and cultural relevance in a changing television landscape. These repeated strikes demonstrated how vulnerable television production was to labor disputes during the 1980s, and Dynasty's experience showed how even successful shows could face significant obstacles that were completely outside the control of their creators and producers. Fact 14. Gerald Ford made a cameo appearance. During Dynasty's third season, at the absolute height of the show's cultural influence and television ratings dominance, former United States President Gerald Ford made a surprising guest appearance as himself on the December 21, 1983 episode, bringing an unprecedented level of political star power to a primetime soap opera that was already known for attracting major Hollywood celebrities to its cast. Ford's cameo appearance occurred during a particularly significant moment in Dynasty's history, as the show had reached the peak of its popularity and had become what television critics described as the program that epitomized an era of glamour and decadence in American entertainment. The former president's willingness to appear on Dynasty demonstrated just how culturally important the show had become, reaching far beyond typical television audiences to capture the attention of political figures and establishment personalities who normally stayed away from soap opera storylines. This presidential cameo was particularly noteworthy because it represented a rare instance of a former commander-in-chief appearing on a fictional television drama series, especially one that focused on wealthy families engaged in business scheming, romantic betrayals, and elaborate personal conflicts. Ford's appearance suggested that Dynasty had transcended its origins as simple entertainment programming to become a genuine cultural phenomenon that even high-level political figures wanted to be associated with during its moment of maximum influence. The timing of Ford's guest appearance was perfect from a publicity standpoint, as it occurred during Dynasty's third season, when the show was consistently ranking among the top television programs in America and had become a weekly appointment viewing experience for millions of households across the country. The former president's cameo helped reinforce Dynasty's reputation as a show that attracted the biggest names in American society, from Hollywood stars to business leaders, and now even former occupants of the White House. Ford's appearance also highlighted how Dynasty had become more than just a television show, but rather a reflection of American attitudes toward wealth, power, and success during the prosperity-focused culture of the early 1980s, making it natural for political figures to want to associate themselves with its glamorous image. Fact 15. 2 different mansion locations for filming. The imposing Carrington family mansion that served as the centerpiece of Dynasty's visual storytelling was actually a clever combination of 2 completely different California estates, each chosen for specific filming purposes that created the illusion of a single magnificent property where all the family's drama and scheming took place. This elaborate deception required careful coordination between the production team and location managers to ensure that viewers would never notice they were seeing 2 distinct properties presented as one unified family estate. The primary location used for Dynasty's most recognizable shots was the Filoli estate in Woodside, California, a genuine 48-room mansion that provided the perfect backdrop for the show's opening credits sequence and establishing shots that appeared at the beginning of episodes. This impressive Georgian revival-style mansion, built in the early 1900s, offered exactly the kind of old-money elegance and architectural grandeur that the producers wanted to associate with the Carrington family's wealth and social status. However, when Dynasty needed exterior shots for specific dramatic scenes, particularly those requiring special features like gardens, courtyards, or water elements, the production team turned to a second location, Arden Villa in Pasadena, California. This 17-room Palladian-style house became the filming location for some of Dynasty's most memorable outdoor scenes, including the legendary Lily Pond catfight between Crystal and Alexis that became one of television's most famous confrontations. The decision to use Arden Villa for these dramatic exterior scenes made practical sense because this property had specific architectural features and landscaping elements that were better suited for the elaborate storylines that Dynasty's writers created. The Pasadena estate's gardens and water features provided the perfect setting for romantic encounters, dramatic confrontations, and the kind of visually striking scenes that helped make Dynasty a cultural phenomenon. Both properties had extensive histories as filming locations for various television shows and movies over the decades, making them experienced venues for handling the complex logistics of television production. The seamless integration of footage from these 2 different estates demonstrated the skill of Dynasty's production team in creating a convincing fictional world that combined the best visual elements from multiple real locations